So, welcome to Midweek Experiments in Faithfulness. This is a weekly facilitated spiritual practice with a Quaker flavor and an experimental ethos. My name is Jen, and I'm the program manager here at Beacon Hill Friends House, where I live and work. So, Beacon Hill Friends House is a Quaker center for learning and action and a residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values. And tonight we have James Ryder with the practice Anyone Can Lobby for Immigration Reform. So as Bobby Trice, who works for FCNL, noted during his midweek practice on October 28th, Quakers have often carried concerns about justice, some of which have led them to lobby for change. One concern for many Quakers and others right now is that in these difficult times, our undocumented siblings are especially vulnerable to political attack. So in this practice, we will build from Bobby's practice to learn how to leverage our stories and testimony to convince our elected representatives in Congress to take action toward recognizing human dignity, reflect and share our experiences with immigration, and take some of the first steps towards supporting undocumented people in our states, so where we are. James is a returned Peace Corps volunteer who served in Peru, a graduate student in international development with a focus on immigration, refugees, and displaced peoples at Clark University, and recently became a member of the Friends Committee on National Legislation's Advocacy Corps team. He grew up in Massachusetts, attending New England yearly meeting sessions, and he is most proud of being a former counselor at Friends Camp. So again, welcome. We're happy that you've joined us, and James, it is all yours.
Thank you so much, Jen. That is the most formal introduction I've ever received. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the space and for all of you taking the time on your evenings to talk a little bit about immigration reform and what we can do on this very important issue. So with that, we have a bit of a presentation just to keep me on track. I'm going to talk a little bit more about why I decided to start working on this issue. And that can go into the next slide. So you can see a very young and unbearded James in that photo. I grew up Quaker. I converted to Quakerism when I was in junior high, and I attended things when I was in elementary school as well. And growing up with those Quaker values kind of led me to idea of integrity, right? Speaking your truth while listening to others. And that's why I put that quote in the slide. I have long believed that speaking truth is both the simplest way of leading your life and one of the most difficult to achieve. So I kind of see my work in immigration lobbying as trying to find that truth and trying to find the good in all people. So I grew up in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, which is a fairly white community, but I worked as a landscaper, my first job in high school, and that was kind of my first exposure to the immigrant community. Speaking with my coworkers during lunch breaks and while we were working outside, inspired me to want to understand life outside our borders a bit better. So in college, I took every possible opportunity I could to get abroad. I went to Cuba, South Africa, Brazil, India, and each of those places was impacted by displacement, right? People being displaced from their homes because of climate change, because of violence, conflicts, economic exploitation. And that's really where I started to see this issue more when I returned back to the States and seeing that these same issues are impacting my own country. And so my lobbying is both rooted in kind of this academic background that I developed in college, studying immigration policy, and now I'm continuing to do, and also from trying to seek that of God in all people and kind of recognizing our shared humanity that isn't necessarily divided by borders. So that said, we'll move on to the next slide. So what is lobbying, right? I think I put the cartoon there largely because I think a lot of times people think of lobbying, they think of this kind of transactionary negative practice of very wealthy individuals having influence over politicians. Like you can see, pay no attention to the man outside, the voter, the constituent, because they have access and they can buy that access with dollars. But lobbying is actually just relationship building, and everyone should have access to congressional offices and can get access to those staffers through constituent lobbying. So that's why I put anyone can lobby. These are public officials, and it's important to remember that because their offices work for us, right? We're the public. So lobbying shouldn't be something that's only accessible to those who can buy access. It's a lot about persistence, and it's a lot about organizing and bringing numbers to those offices, but anyone can do it, and it's not that scary. So that next slide. So just a bit about why would you decide to lobby? I know that people have limited free time, people have limited energy to commit to something. Why should I commit my energy to lobbying? So no matter what issue you care about, lobbying brings legislators' attention to it, which is part of why it's part of agenda setting. So it's not that congressional offices are always looking for different topics, different things. What are people talking about right now? What do voters care about? They deal with all the spectrum of legislation, but what they bring to the forefront and bring to a vote depends on what people are talking about. So by going into offices and talking about these issues over and over and over again, you're saying, hey, I really care about this, and it's not just a fleeting issue for me. So sometimes I'll have coworkers from FCNL. My office in Massachusetts, fortunately, are pretty sympathetic to immigration, and they do take the time to hear from us, but you'll hear the excuse, well, we would do something about it, but we don't hear much from constituents. So lobbying as a constituent takes away that excuse. And I want to say that lobbying isn't the only tool in your political toolkit, right? Direct action is just as important. Taking to the streets, marching, voting, organizing, having conversations at your dinner table are just as important, but it's another tool that I think is underused on how you can bring issues that you care about to people in power who can have impact on making lasting change in legislation. So it's part of a larger cycle that's bigger than yourself, and it does make a difference. So I put on there a tweet, actually. This is kind of one of the small victories for my lobbying effort so far. We actually wrote this tweet with the group that I was lobbying with. We met with McGovern, and then together we drafted a tweet about what we wanted McGovern to be saying about DACA and about immigration. And he took our draft and he published it. He added the whole 15 months ago and enough is enough. But the part about our friends, family, coworkers, and neighbors, we really thought it was important that his office frame immigration not just in economic terms. And it made an impact, right? He started talking about it that way. So even if it's those small little changes, it's a tweet, it's him bringing a letter to the floor, it makes an impact. So with that, I'm just gonna show a quick video about immigration, because I personally am not an immigrant, right? So I'm not directly impacted by the issue that I'm lobbying for, but it's important to recognize the kind of people that you're advocating with and for when you enter a congressional office. So with that, I have a short video just about the kind of impact that immigration law can have on someone's life. It's from the United We Dream group, which is a partner with FCNL, and they came to our trainings, and they work a lot on the Dream and Promise Act, which is our legislative ask this year.
Amazing grace. Sorry. The sound that saved a wretch like me.
What does it mean to be undocumented in this country? Before DACA, when we were 16, my twin sister and I approached an attorney, and he tells us, in this country, you're no one. In this country, you don't exist. I was born in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, Mexico. My mother and my twin sister and I immigrated to the United States when I was 3. I remember my mother always telling us, if you just work hard, it'll pay off. So that's what Jasmine and I did. We worked hard. In high school, played volleyball, basketball, softball. I was on the cheer team, the dance team. I got good grades. I got the weekend job. It still was not enough to make me worthy. After learning that I was undocumented, I started to have dreams of being persecuted. I was running away from something and there were people chasing me. I was just always afraid that I was going to get caught. I remember opening my DACA and getting that paperwork in the mail was this sense of, oh my God, I finally exist. DACA allows me to do what I've dreamt of becoming, a doctor. 5 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school. I'm 8 months from graduation. I'm so close to fulfilling that dream. And if I don't have that work permit that DACA gives me, I may finish my education and not be able to do anything with it. It was impossible to get into medical school, and there I am. It was impossible to pay for medical school, not having financial aid, not having access to loans. And here I am. You know, my God gave me my dream, and He's not gonna leave me in the middle of it. Our community lived before DACA, will continue to live even if DACA is discontinued. We just have this faith that it'll work out. We don't know how, but it'll work out. My name is Yasmin Irasoki-Ruiz. I am an identical twin, an advocate, an aunt. I am a future surgeon.
Powerful story. I'll have to take a moment to see if people can process that. But the idea is that, right, legal status is more than, and I think that story illustrates this, legal status is a lot more than just, you know, paperwork. It's the security in belonging somewhere and being able to live day to day, to have rights. And so that's just one story and not necessarily representative of every immigrant experience in the United States. And I don't want to fall into the narrative of, oh, this person can come because of they're a doctor or, you know, they're doing the right thing. There's no good immigrant, you know, every immigrant is here for a reason. But it just showed, I think it's a powerful story, and I'm grateful for that person for sharing it on a national platform, that not having legal status is a day-to-day aspect of someone's life, right? And so there's like, I put here on the second bullet point of the slide that citizenship means recognizing someone's belonging, there's different kinds of citizenship, both legally, there's the legal channels in the United States immigration, I don't think we have time for today, very complicated, but there's also cultural citizenship, right? Who do we accept as belonging here? And that's reflected in our immigration law and our immigration system. So it's a means of recognize who we are and compared to others, building those dividing lines in our society. And importantly, immigration has this legal aspect where if you're this legal status, you can't get a driver's license, but if this one you can. With this legal status, you can pursue an education. With this one, you can't. With this legal status, you're only a worker and nothing else. So for me, it's why it's really grounded in my faith and practice, is that I see this as an issue of humanity and recognizing that there's God in all people, that we're equal in that way, and that our system does not reflect that as it stands. So with that said, I wanted to kind of break this down a bit. I know that was a bit heavy topic. And I'm hoping, I think the next slide's breakout rooms, right? Yes, so I have some reflection questions to kind of discuss in smaller groups. I think it's more comfortable to talk, with one person than in a big group. That, what is your connection? Because we're all connected to immigration in some way. So what's your connection to immigration? When did your family come to the United States? Or when have you ever interacted or benefited from immigration? Or so when you think of immigration, what things come to mind for you? What boils up? And then how often do you have to think about citizenship and your right to exist here in this country? And then for you, what does it mean to belong legally or otherwise in the United States? So those are just some kind of general query questions to discuss in your small groups. And I thought we could come back and kind of have a bigger group discussion before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of lobbying. So I'm not gonna lie to you. It's not the be all end all fix for our immigration system. I don't think one piece of legislation ever could, but it's very viable right now because it's already passed in the previous House, and it was just waiting for a vote on the Senate. So it gives a path to 3 out of the 11 million undocumented people in the United States, and it focuses on 2 specific groups within that 11 million. One is DACA, which we heard about in that story earlier, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which was an executive action signed by President Obama that allowed undocumented immigrants who were brought here before they were 16 and before June 2007 to get work authorization and deferred action and limited exemption from deportation. So they didn't give them a legal path to citizenship. It just allowed them to stay in the country for a longer period of time. They had to renew every 2 years. This was then challenged by Trump, and they made them renew every 1 year. And they could get a social security card that they could only use for work, not for public benefits. And they were allowed driver's license and access to higher education. So I know that's a lot of like rigmarole and kind of legal stuff, but the idea is that it was an action that a president took to defer having to deal with a problem until it became politically feasible, right? And then TPS is called Temporary Protected Status. And that was established in 1990s as a humanitarian program for people who are living in countries with armed conflict or national disaster, very similar to DACA. It was not a permanent way to citizenship. You can't get legal permanent status or LPR. And the government has discretion to end TPS for your country at any moment in time. So that you could just decide that your country's off the list and then you can get deported. So it's these 2 groups within our larger immigration system that are kind of in limbo, right? And you could see that with Trump's challenges to DACA and to TPS, that they weren't sustainable actions, they're executive actions. And that's why we're seeking a law that would make a more permanent path to citizenship for people who are in these 2 categories. So if you can click on the next slide. These aren't nearly all of the categories, which is why there are only 3 to 11 million. And I put this slide up there just to show you how complex our immigration system is. And there's so many different kinds of legal status. I did a presentation earlier this year just on legal status that about an hour, but it's very complicated to get legal permanent residency or citizenship to this country. It can take decades. And so you're kind of stuck in this position of not knowing whether you belong, whether you can stay, whether you can make a life here, whether it's viable, and even if it's the conditions that you've grown up knowing most of your life, or you fled horrible conditions in your own country. So our system as it stands clearly isn't working. So what can we do? And what can we do just, with an hour of your time once a week? I know you're all very busy people. So can you click the next slide? How to lobby. You can lobby. It's one thing you can do. So lobbying is just storytelling. And in our sessions earlier, you all were telling stories about how you're impacted by immigration, right? All of us are touched by this issue. The only thing you need to know is what specific law you want to push forward, right? It could be the Dream and Promise Act. That's the one I'm working with FCNO. You could talk to a legislator and find out more about another law that you could be even more passionate about. And you can still talk to their office. So it's expressing why you care about, what's your connection to it, and then repeating And that consistency is important, coming over and over and over again to show this is something that you're not just going to go vent and leave. You're going to keep coming back to the office, keep checking in, keep seeing, building that relationship with that congressperson or their staffer. So what does an effective story look like is the next slide. So usually you can attach it to like a specific, it's usually you have about 15 to 20 minutes in these visits. So it's a short story. This is a moment when I was impacted or experience that impacted me regarding the issue, could be immigration or any other issue. Connect legislation to your values. So I use my faith a lot of times in lobby visits, talking about I'm a Quaker, and as a Quaker, I believe that there's a divine in all people, and I don't see that reflected in our immigration system. I don't see our immigration recognizing the humanity in all people. So you can use that. You can use facts. If you know a recent news article struck your interest or you learned a fact about immigration, you could sprinkle that into your story. So the big questions when you're thinking about your story should be, why am I here? Why am I doing this work? What made me first care about this issue? And what is the message that I want the staffer to do? And it should be something less than a minute. So with that, I want to quickly share my story. Keep in mind, I had Advocacy Corps training for about a week, and we crafted these. So don't feel pressure to have a perfect story, and feel free to criticize my story. It's not perfect. It could be shorter, could cut here and there. So I'll just say, hello, my name is James, and I was born and raised in Massachusetts. I'm a Quaker, a returned Peace Corps volunteer, and a graduate student at Clark University. My experience first interacting with immigrants began in high school through my first job in Dartmouth, Massachusetts as a landscaper. I worked alongside members of my community from Cape Verde, Portugal, and Guatemala. Hearing their stories during lunch breaks or on the job inspired me to seek a better understanding of life outside the United States and the push factors that cause immigration to our country and people to cross borders seeking a better life. After college, I went to Spain to teach English and worked with youth in Peru through the Peace Corps, where I was privileged enough to serve as a representative for our country and its values, liberty, dignity, and justice abroad. However, upon returning to the United States, I've been disappointed to see these same values are not reflected in our immigration system. There are 3 million Dreamers in the United States and TPS recipients, many of whom are young people like myself, looking to live out a dignified and lawful life in the United States, but have to fear deportation because Congress refuses to act and provide a permanent path to citizenship. This is why many immigrants in my community feel insecure in a legal status, have no clear path to seeking a permanent life here. Immigrants are integral parts of my community. They are my neighbors, my friends, and my coworkers. They shouldn't be used as political pawns. As a Quaker and as someone who believes in the decency and worth in all people, I implore you to support the Dream and Promise Act to make a small step towards making a permanent path to citizenship for folks in my community. So that's an example of a short story that hits the points. Here's my personal connection. Here's what I'm asking you to do, So it's just connecting your experience and your feeling and your values to a concrete action that legislator can take. So with that said, I'm going to send you back into the abyss to work on how you can bring those feelings that you've had in the first part of breakout rooms to working on a story. So we'll have just about 5 to 10 minutes. I'm not expecting a perfect work of art, just something that you could say in a legislative office so you might feel more comfortable and you might want to join me on these next visits maybe, just putting it out there.